Hey guys, we are in day 83 in our Bible reading plan, Numbers 31 through 33 and Psalm 83. And let's hit it. Today's big idea is this: just because you have to fight for what God has already promised you does not mean you're on the wrong path. And by the way, that theme is going to come up a lot in our walk towards the promised land in the weeks to come. But for now, just sort of start thinking about that. But before we make our way there, let me take you back to Numbers chapter 31. Numbers 31 is a tough chapter to read, and it's easy to read it and kind of think, what? I can't believe that God would do this. So often, people who don't believe in God have this approach to reading the Old Testament and think about God's wrath and how could that be. And so let me remind you, first of all, to go back to Numbers 25 for a little context. Remember the plague that broke out where 24,000 people had died because a man had brought in a Midianite woman, and the context was that the people of Israel were whoring with the Baal of Peor, and they had yoked themselves with the gods of the land. And the huge importance of the people of Israel from the beginning was to be separate from the land and to worship the one true God. And so what we often forget, first of all, is that God has created all things and he decides how things are played out. So for us to even question God is so proud. But besides that, I think we downplay the severity of sin to the point where we question God's goodness in eradicating sin to protect holiness, his holiness, and the joy of his people ultimately. And so even today, it's hard to read this text on one hand. On the other hand, I also see so many areas where we've made room for sin in Christianity, in the Christian church, because of our refusal to believe that God could punish sin. So apply it how you will, but meditate on the level of conviction you have versus your sense that people should be able to do what they want to do, because how could you do this? And of course, God did preserve the innocent, the virgin woman, and had always, throughout the Old Testament, gave room for anyone who would put their faith in God and the God, one true God, that they would be able to worship according to his ways. Then we get into chapter 32, where Reuben is trying to settle down. And the big concept here, I think, that I got out of it is that community is so important. And Moses was like, you can't settle down. We haven't gotten to the promised land. And so Reuben sort of says, no, we're not saying we're not going to fight with the brothers, but we're going to leave our people here. And so, of course, God makes room for that. And so now we start seeing the beginning of a settlement in the land. And a lot of the questions that come up in the Middle East, like why are things the way they are? I think you can start seeing sort of how this plays out. God owns everything. God created the world, and God allotted certain land for certain people according to his will. And no one will be able to defeat them. They walk victoriously, and God blesses them, and that blessing has continued. And we see it play out. And I think it's hard to read the Old Testament and not see that so clearly. And then finally we get to chapter 33, which is a recounting of the journey all the way from Egypt to where they were at that point. And so a lot in today's reading, but let me finish with, again, restating our big idea, which is just because you have to fight for what God has already promised you doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. And let that bless you today as you seek to fight the battles that God has for you in your own Christian walk. Surround yourself with community who will fight along with you, and you are part of this community here. We're praying for you and we love you. Take care.